Jessica Stumpf reinvented her career 3 times before the age of 40. Not because she was bored or restless, each transition was intentional and strategic. From meteorology to emergency management to the private sector, Jessica didn't walk away from her previous roles, she built on them. She took the skills, lessons, and even uncomfortable moments from each chapter and used them to create a brand new opportunity for herself.
We live in this instant gratification world, and something like this is not instant gratification. One, you've got to figure out, what is it that I kind of want to pivot to, and how do I do that? How do I get there? And you've got to really think through that process.
How Jessica managed the process while finding her purpose by stepping outside her comfort zone on Reinvention at Any Age. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Reinvention at Any Age. I'm Amy Sweezy, and I am passionate about helping you navigate through your reinvention. My guest today holds a number of titles: meteorologist, emergency manager, association president, and public safety solutions engineer, to name just a few. She graduated from Penn State University with a degree in meteorology and went on to spend the next several years in local TV news. Tired, literally, of waking up in the middle of the night, she took her meteorology skills and applied them to a new job with the state of South Carolina. From there, she moved to county emergency management, started as a planning coordinator, then a deputy director, and eventually the first civilian and first female to hold the position of Greenville County, South Carolina, Director of Emergency Management. And somewhere along the way, she managed to return to school for her master's degree in emergency management. Then Jessica Stumpf transitioned from government work to the private sector and now serves as a public safety solution engineer for barren weather. This is where her unique skills as both a meteorologist and an emergency manager are used on a daily basis. She also volunteers with the National Weather Association and works closely with college students who are ready to join the workforce. Jessica is here today to share her story and also share her best practices for not only reinvention at any age, but also tips on job hunting and job changes, resume building, networking, and focusing on what sets you apart. Please welcome Jessica Stumpf to the podcast. Hi, Jess. Thanks so much for being here.
Hey, Amy, thank you so much for having me.
Well, I was trying to remember how long we've known each other, and I think it's about 15 years. I'm thinking it was after you left Midland, Texas, and you were working in Myrtle Beach on TV. Is that right?
That sounds about right.
Okay. Well, I want to start at the beginning. So just give the listeners a little synopsis of your upbringing. Where are you from? Where'd you grow up? How did you end up with a meteorology degree and a TV career, first of all?
Sure. I grew up in Northeast Ohio in a town called Niles. And I learned about a year before I was born, an F5 tornado went through my hometown and it killed 9 people. And that's kind of what started me, getting interested in meteorology. I remember as a kid seeing the debris in the trees. My mom would point this out and she would say, "Oh, that was from the tornado." It missed the house that I grew up in by about a quarter of a mile, but I was just hooked on weather. All my mom's friends, our relatives would always be asking me, "Well, what's the weather going to be?" And apparently, I would watch the Weather Channel more than I watched Sesame Street, so they kind of knew that was probably the path that I was going to go. And I think that's probably the same for a lot of meteorologists. There's some event in life that has kind of shaped it, and you've started watching the Weather Channel or your local TV news or something along those lines. But that's where I grew up, and when I started looking at colleges, I knew Ohio State had a program, I knew Penn State had a program, I looked at Nebraska, Miami, but ultimately I ended up at Penn State, and I was very happy with that decision.
And was it always TV that you wanted to do, or when you were first at Penn State, was it something else?
I really wanted to do research. I did not wanna do TV. That's not where I wanted to go, but I needed to find, some type of internship or something to do, that summer between junior and senior year. So I said, "Well, I'll go ahead and give TV a shot and see what this looks like," and I ended up interning at WKBN, which was the CBS affiliate in Youngstown, Ohio, and there I interned with Don Guthrie and Paul Wetzel, and they were probably some of the best folks that I could have ever asked to intern with, and I learned so much from them. Took that back to college, and I still wasn't sure if TV was the route that I wanted to go. But the summer after that, I was a super senior, so I got to go one more semester than normal.
Oh,
But
I
that
love the way
summer,
you worded that. You got to go.
yeah, I did, I did. But I ended up doing some some applications to try to be on the TV show Storm Chasers, and so I had to submit a bunch of videos for it. They ended up not choosing me, so I had to figure out what to do for that last summer, and that's where Joe Murgo from WTAJ in Altoona, Pennsylvania, came into the picture, and he said, "Hey, look, I know you've done an internship and I know you're looking for something for the summer. I really need someone to work on Sundays and fill in, during the week. Would you be interested in it?" And I said, okay. So that's really where I got my start was even before I graduated, I did get paid to work Sundays and fill in at WTAJ in Altoona, Pennsylvania.
Well, you and I commiserated a lot over working that morning TV shift. And, people just don't get how hard it is to wake up at 2 a.m. But at some point, long before I left TV, you made the decision to make the jump and get out of television. So, what was it that went into that process? I mean, this was your dream job. So,
Mhm.
why change to emergency management instead of TV?
Well, it wasn't that I didn't love meteorology. I still do, and I still work in that field, but I did not love the TV aspect of it. Didn't like, not knowing what my normal schedule was going to be. The days changed. I was working weekends, mornings, split shifts, and I started to feel like I was missing out on life. And I needed to figure out how do I not miss out on life anymore, but also still be able to pay my bills because TV does not always pay so well. So I had to figure out what to do. And I knew within that last contract in Myrtle Beach that I needed to figure out what was next. And one of the things that I've always been told is to have a backup plan, like really be thinking a couple of steps ahead of what you could do. And so while I was under contract, I tried to figure out what would be the next steps. What is something that I could still use my meteorology background, my meteorology degree, and just transition it into something else. And that's when I learned about what emergency management was. And I met with the county emergency manager there in Horry County, South Carolina. And I just said, "Hey, I keep running into all your folks everywhere, but do you mind having lunch with me and, telling me a little bit about what you do?" And so we met for lunch and I asked him, I said, "Do you think this is something that I could do or do I need to go back to school for it?" And he goes, "I wouldn't go back to school for it unless somebody pays you to go back to school for it." He said, "Your meteorology degree would be an asset in this field because you understand these natural hazards. We have natural hazards, but we also have man made hazards. But you already have a leg up on some of these man or natural disasters and natural hazards that we do face here. So this would actually be an asset in emergency management."
So, doing that research, reaching out to people, asking questions, that was really key in
Yes.
helping you figure out what your next step was.
Absolutely, because I didn't know if it was something I could do, and I learned very quickly once getting into that field, it truly is like drinking water from a fire hose, but it keeps you wanting to learn more. Everything is different, every day is different, every challenge is different. So it ended up being a really good fit for me. So when my contract was coming up at the end of Myrtle Beach, this was in 2014. I was about a month or 2 out, and I met with that same emergency manager, and he said, "Hey, listen, I know your contract's coming up. Let's talk, about what steps are next." He's like, "I gotta go give a presentation at this thing." He didn't tell me what it was, and he goes, "Just meet me in the lobby here at this hotel. This is where I have to go to do this presentation." I said, "Oh, okay." And it was my day off. So, it was pouring down rain that day. I remember I'm, like, in rain boots, jeans, a rain jacket, we're sitting in this lobby, we're talking about what next steps are career-wise, and up walks this man in a, navy blue blazer, shirt and tie, khakis, and I'm like, "What's going on?" Here, it ended up being the state director of emergency management. I did not know I was meeting him that day or anything like
Surprise.
that. Yes, it was a very much a surprise. So he made the introduction and said, "Hey, she's looking to get into emergency management, and her contract is up here in Myrtle Beach soon." And he said, "Well, we've got some job openings coming up, so make sure you keep an eye on our website." And so I did. And so I applied for several jobs there. I interviewed for 3 different jobs there and finally was hired as the individual assistance coordinator for the South Carolina Emergency Management Division. So that's how I got my foot in the door. It wasn't as a meteorologist, they saw that as an asset, but I got my foot in the door a different way.
So, you really were, it was kind of like on the job training almost.
Absolutely. It 100% was. And then after a year in that role, a position opened up in the planning section for the earthquake program manager position. And I knew that would get me back towards the natural hazards. So I spent about a year and a half as the earthquake program manager for the state of South Carolina. Yes, we have earthquakes here. We have a lot of them. There's been a lot lately. Just here in the last week or two, we've had plenty of earthquakes in the state. Low magnitude, but we've had a lot of them. So I worked in that role for about a year and a half, and then, Greenville County came calling and said, "Hey, we know you do planning and you've been doing a lot of planning for the state. We're looking to hire a planner. Would you be interested in coming to Greenville County?" And I said, "Sure." So they sent me the application and I applied, and that's how I ended up in Greenville County.
All right, so you started working at the state level of emergency management in South Carolina, and then, of course, pivoted to that local government at the county level. And I
Mhm.
think to the outside person, that almost looks kind of odd, right? To go from big state to small county, it almost looks like a step backward. But that really wasn't the case. What was that job switch really about?
It was about really getting into, like, the meat and potatoes of what emergency management is, like, really getting your hands and feet dirty in the field. At the state level, you're kind of at a higher level where you're helping a lot of different counties and you're working with a lot of different folks, and I learned so much in that role. But I wanted to find a place where I could make a difference in the community directly in which I was living. And so I had visited Greenville County before. I thought it was a beautiful place to live. And so when that opportunity came up, it allowed me to work specifically with a jurisdiction, so the county, and it's the largest county by population in the state of South Carolina. So it allowed me to work with a lot of different folks to include fire chiefs and law enforcement, EMS, nonprofit agencies, our voluntary organizations that are active in disaster. I got to work with hospitals. So I got to work with a lot of varying people in different disciplines who all have to come together to build this plan together. So it kind of really let me get into the nitty-gritty of what emergency management is.
And at this point, you're moving up the chain, you're getting promotions and getting different
Mhm.
job titles, and you're also completing your master's degree at this point as
Yes,
well, right?
that's
Why was
right.
that important?
I felt like I needed to just have a more well-rounded look at everything because I know that I lean towards the natural hazards, and I know that's not all that we face. We also have man-made hazards. We've a lot of nuclear plants here in South Carolina, so that's radiological issues are a concern. You have hazmat issues. We've got Interstate 85 that runs right through the center of the county, and there's a lot of hazardous materials that travel not only on the interstates, but on the railways too. So I knew at some point I was going to have to deal with something that was not a natural hazard. So I wanted to try to make myself more well rounded and educated in those areas. So that's part of why I decided to go ahead and apply for that master's degree and work through that program. But when I decided to do this, it was when COVID happened. So that was another thing that, typically you don't think emergency management maybe is dealing with, but we were. We were very heavily involved in the COVID response from taking in PPE and giving it out to the agencies and organizations that needed it most because we had shortages. So we had to look at who really needed those items and get them out to them. We also had first responder testing sites so that we could hurry up and try to get those first responders back out on the job. So we had a lot of different things that were even going on during COVID. So that kind of taught me, maybe I need to, be more well-rounded and, get myself some more education on the things that I'm not as educated in.
Well, obviously it worked because now you've made it to the top of the county. You're the director of emergency management. And I mentioned at the beginning, the first female director in Greenville
Mhm.
County, and you weren't even 40 years old yet. So
No,
you were like 40 under 40.
that's
Did
right.
you did you ever stop and think, "Wow, I did it. This is me. Like I am the top dog."
I looked at it and I was like, "This has gotta be a mistake. Somebody trusted me to do this." But it was really truly an honor. The way that the emergency management department in Greenville County was set up when I came in, it was under the county sheriff's office. So at that point, only a sworn law enforcement officer could be the deputy director or the director of emergency management. Well, that changed about 2 years after I came to the county, and they pulled emergency management out and had it report directly to county administration. So, prior to 2019, you had to be a sworn law enforcement officer in order to hold that role. And so it was not even an option I thought was possible for me, until that happened, and then things just one thing that happened after another, and eventually I found myself in that role, and it was truly an honor, but it was also a very difficult role to be in too.
I think a lot of women suffer from imposter syndrome. Did you find any difficulty being a woman in this field and in this
Oh yeah,
position?
absolutely. And I think in a lot of public safety fields, it is very male dominated. And now you're starting to see more and more women in these roles, whether it's from EMS to law enforcement to fire to emergency management. You're seeing more and more women come into these roles, which is really amazing to see. And it's really exciting because we all have different perspectives, we all have different backgrounds, we all have different experiences. And when we pull all of that together with everybody, whether it's male or female, it really truly gives you a better product, a better plan, a better way of preparing because you are pulling everyone together in their experience and their knowledge.
I'm super fascinated by your current job. I know you ended up then leaving that government position, which, of course, as people know from the outside looking in, you've got nice retirement benefits, good insurance, paid
Yeah.
holidays, affordable life insurance, and you decide to move into a private sector job. So tell me a little bit about that transition.
So, one of the things that kind of made me decide to go ahead and make that transition was as you move up the chain into a role like a director, you're dealing a lot with administration. You're not really into the, nitty gritty of the planning again and whatnot. You're dealing with a lot of other things from, HR to payroll to, just those administrative tasks that kind of pull you, away from being in the middle of it sometimes. So while I was at a conference one year, Barron Weather was there, and it was really cool to meet them, see what the technology is that they have and what they do and how they work with public safety. And I was really interested in some of their products, especially for our emergency operations center in terms of monitoring and also forecasting weather, something that would make things easier, something that was visually appealing to look at on the screens in the EOC. So I was looking at it from a lot of different angles. But as I started talking to them about it, I started asking some questions. And I could tell they were a little puzzled by the questions I was asking because nobody had really asked some of the questions, I guess, that I was asking. And I think in their mind, there was like, wow, there's a lot that we don't understand about public safety and state and local government as a whole, how their budget cycles work, what their pinch points are, how funding works and do they operate off of grants and when do these grants happen and what do they truly need to know on the ground in these weather situations. And I kind of explained that to them, these are the things that I need to know. So I need to know, what is the hazard? What are we going to be seeing? When is it going to happen? Afternoon and evening isn't exactly helpful. I need a more, significant time frame, like 3 to 7 p.m. Where is it going to happen? Is it the whole county? Is it part of the county? What is the confidence level in that forecast? So there's certain things that I need to know. And I could kind of see the wheels going in their brains like, oh, we haven't really thought about this from this perspective. So what ended up happening was they were like, we need somebody who understands public safety and they understand the administrative piece of this and whatnot. And basically, the position allowed me to marry both of those things. It allowed me to get back more into the meteorology side of things, but also continue to work with the folks that I really enjoyed working with every single day on the public safety side.
Well, I love hearing about companies that are willing to embrace change because you and I, from the TV world, we always knew Barron Weather as being a radar company. And that
Yes.
was their big thing for many years is they just
Yep.
supplied but big deal, supplied radars to TV stations. And now, if people don't know, they are in so many different realms and so many different areas, and this
Mhm.
is one of them where they recognize that, hey, we need to grow and build, and the way to do that is to bring in someone who has meteorology and emergency management experience.
It's one of those things that you don't see very often. You see meteorologists or you see emergency managers, and a lot of emergency managers come from that public safety background. Maybe they started off in dispatch, or maybe they were a firefighter or a law enforcement officer, or they worked in EMS. And that's usually how you see folks come up, or even they've been in the military. You'll see folks come up through those ranks. But it's not always common to see somebody with a meteorology background make their way into emergency management. I think it's becoming more common now. I'm starting to see it more and more, and I'm also starting to see more emergency management degree programs that are popping up across the country. There weren't very many, 10, 15 years ago, but now we're starting to see more of it. And so I think it's a very much growing field, and it's not just government that's growing. Your hospitals have emergency managers, your colleges and universities have emergency managers, your private sector has emergency managers. They're everywhere. Everyone really focuses on government, but they're honestly everywhere.
I know that the University of Central Florida here in the Orlando area just started an emergency management program a couple of years ago. So it's growing, it's exciting.
Yes, it is very
Um,
exciting.
so, what would you say has been the biggest factor in helping you find this specialized niche? It blends your two career paths into where you are now.
So I'm gonna go back to a story from when I was in college at Penn State. I was a part of the campus weather service, and we had John Gordon with the National Weather Service come and give a presentation to our campus weather service folks. And then several of us went out to dinner afterwards, and we started asking him some career advice. And he's like, "You have to find the thing that is gonna make you stand out from everyone else. What is it about you that is gonna make you stand apart from all of those resumes that are coming in?" And that really has stuck with me through the years. What is gonna make me stand out against the next candidate?
And you mentioned the meetings that you had with the emergency manager that was the first person that kind of helped you
Mhm.
bridge from meteorology over into a different career. Is networking, mentorship, building relationships, did you find that to be an important step?
Absolutely. You have to talk to people. You have to get to know them. And it's not just, oh, here's my business card. It's a sit down and talk to somebody, build a relationship with them, check in with them. One of the things that we've recently done with the State Emergency Management Association here in South Carolina is developed a leadership program called Leading Edge. We just had our first cohort go through, and what we did is we had mentors and then we had the mentees. And so we are now starting to foster the next generation of emergency managers here in South Carolina. And it was a really great program for the first year. We got a lot of great feedback on it, but we made sure to pair people with folks maybe they didn't really know. Or didn't really know their background, but they had similar interests. And so, for instance, we had one mentee who was a firefighter, but also worked in the emergency management through the fire department. I paired him with the emergency manager for the town of Hilton Head because I knew he had a fire background. And they both thought that was a great relationship, a great mentoring opportunity. So I cannot stress how important it is to build relationships, stay in contact with folks, bounce ideas off of people. We kind of sometimes find ourselves, with blinders on or kind of in our little bubble, and we have got to get out of our bubble. As uncomfortable as it is, as hard as it is, we have to get out of our own way.
And sometimes I think the word networking can actually have a negative connotation because you think of people who are trying to meet people to say, what can you do for me? How can you help me in my job? And so I love that you're using the phrase building relationships more so than networking because it really is a two-way street.
It is, and I think you can learn something from everyone. So, for instance, like my mentee, I feel like I learned a lot from her. I really didn't understand what her role was in her job, and she taught me a lot about the things that she does at work, but also the challenges that she faces. So, we would talk through some of those, well, here's an experience that I had, maybe try approaching it from this way. So it we learned from each other, and it was a great experience because I did not really understand what her role was, but now I have a better understanding and we still can talk about it to this day.
Well, you've sprinkled in a lot of great advice so far in the podcast, but what advice do you have for others who are interested in reinventing their career?
I think the first thing is think about what makes you stand out from everybody else. What is that thing that makes you stand out? For me, I think it was the communication piece of things. The TV side helped me with that, helped me be a pretty good communicator and talk to people. And I think I was like, I need to use that and then also pair it with, my meteorology, but also pair it with emergency management and how I can talk through things and make sure it's in a digestible format. Whether that's messaging to the public about safety precautions, whether that's writing a plan and making sure we're covering all of the bases. So I think first is looking at what's going to set you apart from everybody else. And then talking and meeting with folks who maybe are in that role that you want to be in at some point one day. And I think a lot of people are afraid to do that. It's really uncomfortable to pivot. You're afraid to fail. And I think the way that I tried to look at it was I'd rather know that this is not the route I should go than wonder about it for the rest of my life. I don't like having regrets in that way. That's something that has always really bothered me. I would rather know than not. And so I was like, if I'm going to do this, we're just going to do it. And if it's the wrong thing, it's okay. I will figure it out and I will pivot back to something else. Or I'll pivot back to where I came from. There's nothing that says you can't go back to what you were doing before.
Well, and I think that's what's such an interesting thing is that through your career inventions, you didn't completely start over from scratch. You took all the
Mm-mm.
skills and the tools that you had and you built on that until you got to the place where you are today.
Correct, and I think sometimes we don't think about our skills in the way that maybe we should be. We think about the roles and the jobs that we've had, but what were the actual skills that we used in those roles? And so as I was, looking at Barren Weather as a potential employer, I knew I would have to do some sales within that role. And I was like, I don't know about this. I'm not really a salesperson. And I had somebody say to me, but you are. And I was like, well, what do you mean? And they said, "You do this every single day. You just don't realize that you're doing it." And I said, "Tell me more." And he said, "You have to get everyone to the table, right? Anytime there is a plan that we're updating or an exercise that we're doing or there's a threat to the county, you're having to pull together so many different people from various disciplines and backgrounds. You have to bring them all together and try to get them all on the same page so that we can move forward and execute a plan and respond appropriately. Everyone's got different goals, everyone's got different agendas, but you have to sell them on this is the path that we are taking forward to plan, respond, and recover from this incident." And I was like, light bulb just kind of went off. And I was like, he's right. That's what we do have to do. We do it every single day, even if it's not selling a product, you're selling an idea, you're selling a plan, you're selling a response, you're selling something. And it really changed the way that I looked at it. I didn't think about the skills that I was using every single day in this capacity until somebody was like, you do this every single day, you just don't realize it.
And sometimes that's what it takes is just writing on a piece of paper. What are my skills? What do I do? And what other careers can these translate to? And I think a lot like
Absolutely.
you are right about people get stuck on the title and I'm in this one lane and I can't veer off this road.
I am a big fan of writing things down on paper, because I think there's sometimes just too much going on in my mind that there's a lot of times I will have a notebook beside my bed because my brain just doesn't stop. And so I like to write things down because it makes me think I'm getting it out of my brain and I won't forget about it, but it'll be there when I need to go back to it. So I am a big fan of writing things down and really looking at the pros and the cons and looking at the things that you do every single day that you might not realize are truly transferable skills.
Absolutely. I have that paper by my bed too. So, you and I are both members of the National Weather Association and serve
Yes.
in various volunteer leadership roles. And I know that one of your passions has been working with college students. So,
Mhm.
what is your advice to students specifically in any field, not necessarily emergency management or meteorology, but they're wrapping up their college years, they're preparing to enter the workforce? Any specific advice for them?
I've had several, who I've met through their professors who have said, "Hey, do you mind talking to this student? They're kind of interested in this," or you've done X, Y, and Z. Do you mind talking about this to this student?" And at the National Weather Association, conferences during those student sessions, there's often a panel discussion of folks just from different backgrounds and different fields within, meteorology, for instance, and listening to each one of them, how they ended up where they are today, I think is always beneficial for a college student to hear because I think, for me coming out of college, it's like, oh, you just have to do this and this is the path. Well, that doesn't always have to be the path, and it's okay if it changes. And I think folks are really afraid to change that path. There's already so much pressure coming out of college to get a job in the field in which you have your degree and do all of these things. But it's okay if, after a couple of years, you realize maybe that's not the path you wanted to take. So I think first and foremost, it's okay. If things don't work out the way that you thought they were going to work out, it's okay. Something is going to work out. But two, we've already kind of talked about that building relationships and networking piece. I can't tell you how much of a small world I have realized this is, not just in the meteorology world or the emergency management world, but even moving now into my role at Barron, I have talked to folks in different states and they end up knowing somebody that I know. And I'm like, wow, this is such a small world. I was talking to somebody in Montana a couple months ago And I was kinda telling him what my background was, and he goes, "Oh, I worked for Greenville County EMS back in the day." And I was like, "How'd you end up in Montana?" So we had this whole discussion, but he ended up knowing some of the folks that I've worked with, and so it was just truly such a small world, and you don't really realize it until you're kind of out in it. So I would say it's okay if you stray from the path that you thought you were gonna be on. You've got to build those relationships and talk to people. I know sometimes that's daunting, because you feel like maybe you're bothering folks. The people who truly care and wanna help you along the way, you're not bothering them. They wanna help you. And so I think you have to put yourself out there in order to be able to build those relationships and learn from other folks. We were all there at one point, and some of us are still there, let's be real. It's not an ending thing. You're gonna keep doing this your entire life where you're gonna be building relationships and meeting people. And it's okay to put yourself out there, and if things don't work out the way you thought they were, I promise it's going to be okay.
And don't burn any bridges.
Yes, let's not do that.
Because yes, because it's a small world, don't burn any
Yes,
bridges.
that's right.
So, I know many of the things that you do and have done, like your work with the NWA, and of course, serving as president of the South Carolina Emergency Management Association. It's on a volunteer basis. You're not getting
It is.
paid. So, how important have those volunteer roles been for you?
I have really enjoyed, working with the NWA, both in those student conferences and now with the steering committee for the annual conference. It's kind of giving me a behind the scenes look at what it takes to put on meetings and conferences of this size, but also making sure you're appealing to a wide audience. Meteorology is just not TV. It's not just, government. It's not just aviation. It's not just research. There's a lot of facets of it. And you got to make sure you're providing a well-rounded conference for folks. In terms of emergency management here in South Carolina, we are a small state, but we are a robust state. We have been through a lot over the past 10, 12 years. From 2005 to 2014, we didn't have any federally declared disasters in this state. And since 2014, we have at least had one per year since. So it's been a very active time in terms of disasters here in South Carolina. And that means we all have to learn and grow together and, build our capacity, plan better, respond better, learn from all of these things that have happened here over the past 10 years or so. And we've got to work together in order to do that.
Following your career over the years, I've had a front row seat, I feel like, to your reinvention and several of your job changes. And I know you've already shared a little bit about, your job hunt and some of the changes that it's a process. It's not something where you just decided to quit your job today and tomorrow
Mhm.
you're going to start a whole new career. So I understand that it's transition and you have to find your niche while continuing to work at a demanding job. And I think sometimes that's what people forget, and that a lot of people who are trying to reinvent themselves think they just need to quit their job today and start something new tomorrow. Or they just sit and think about it forever and then they never do actually make that start. So, how important was that sort of transition time, or that taking the time you needed to figure out your reinvention?
I think it was really important. And, we live in this instant gratification world, and something like this is not instant gratification. One, you've got to figure out, what is it that I kind of want to pivot to, and how do I do that? How do I get there? And you've got to really think through that process. And I did that by talking to folks and learning. But even moving from county emergency management into the private sector again, you know I looked at, what have I done here, in government, and how can I keep learning in this role? Because I think people forget that whatever you're doing, even if like there's something going on, I feel like I've talked to a lot of this kind of goes back to the students thing for a second, but I've talked to a lot of students or even early career professionals who they get into a job and after like 2 or 3 months, they're ready to move on. Like this is not what they thought, they're ready to move on. And it's like, hold on, stop, you can learn something from every single opportunity that you have. Sometimes you've got to sit in it and you've got to be uncomfortable. And I know people don't want to hear that and they don't want to do that, but you're going to learn something. You're going to look back on that 10 years from now and say, oh, that's what I learned from that particular role. And I didn't realize it at the time. And I can say that about television. I didn't realize all the things that I learned in television, how they would end up helping me moving into government and eventually back into the private sector. So every role that I have had, there has been some opportunity or something that's happened in that role. Even if I didn't like this or that about maybe a particular role, I learned something from it and it made me uncomfortable. And it's okay to be uncomfortable. I know we don't like it, but it's okay to be uncomfortable because that's where you truly learn and that's where you truly grow.
Jessica, this is great. You're amazing. Thank you so much for being here and being a guest on my podcast. If people want to know more about you, where can they find you or follow you?
You can find me on LinkedIn. You can also follow me on X. I like to be on X a lot. So JESS and my last name Stumpf, STUMPF.
All right. Well, I know that your story of reinvention is going to inspire so many others. So thank you again for being here. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk today.
So, what about you? Were you inspired by Jessica's story? Every role you've had, even the ones you didn't love, has given you something: a skill, a lesson, a connection, a little more clarity about who you are and what you're capable of. Growth rarely happens when we're comfortable. It happens when we stretch ourselves, when we take the interview, when we update the resume, when we raise our hand for something that feels just a little beyond us. So here's a challenge: identify one uncomfortable step that could move you forward and take it. Send the email, make the call, start the application, reach out to the connection, rewrite the resume. Don't waste the experience you've already earned. Build on it. And remember, you don't have to start over to reinvent yourself. You just have to take the next step. And whether you want to do it or you have to do it, always remember, reinvention is possible. Go make it happen for you today.